It started like any other Mr. Beast challenge. The team was set to film an extravagant, larger-than-life event in a secluded mansion for a brand new video. Mr. Beast, known for his over-the-top philanthropic challenges, had promised a grand prize of millions of dollars for the last person standing in this ultimate survival challenge. But as the crew set up, strange things started happening. At first it was subtle, a faint whisper in the halls, objects slightly moved out of place. The mansion was old, but nothing too unusual. As the challenge began, participants were instructed to stay inside the mansion without leaving. It was then that things took a sinister turn. One contestant began hearing footsteps behind him, but when he turned around, no one was there. A crew member was heard laughing maniacally, but it wasn't anyone from the team. The lights flickered sporadically, and doors that were locked all day mysteriously opened. Some contestants claimed to have seen shadowy figures lurking in the corners of their vision. The team thought it was a prank, until one of the cameras caught something unexplainable. In a dark corner of the mansion, a faint silhouette of a man appeared, moving erratically, before disappearing without a trace. Panic spread like wildfire. Despite trying to brush it off, the atmosphere grew heavy. Crew members and participants started experiencing nightmarish dreams, all of which were eerily similar. Visions of a person in an old-fashioned suit, staring at them with hollow eyes. As night fell, the strange occurrences escalated, with objects crashing to the floor and loud banging sounds from the walls. Mr. Beast, always calm under pressure, tried to continue filming. But when one of the crew members went missing, vanishing without a trace, he had no choice but to shut down the production. The police were called, but no evidence could explain what happened. Years later, footage was found on one of the crew's cameras, footage that had been lost during the incident. The camera revealed a chilling last scene. The crew, gathered in the living room, suddenly surrounded by an unseen force. The room filled with a freezing cold, and shadows moved unnaturally. The video ends abruptly as a loud scream echoes through the mansion, followed by complete silence. Some believe the mansion was cursed. Others think the disturbing presence was a result of the mansion's dark history. Rumors say it was built on the site of an old asylum where patients had mysteriously disappeared. But the scariest part of the story, Mr. Beast and his crew never returned to that mansion again, and they made a pact to never speak of the incident. Was it all part of the challenge, or was something truly paranormal happening in the mansion that day? The most popular theory among fans is that the haunting was real, one that Mr. Beast and his team will never forget. The return to the mansion. Months after the terrifying incident, Mr. Beast's team decided to return to the mansion, determined to get to the bottom of what happened. Despite their fear, they knew the internet was buzzing with theories and rumors, and the story had become one of their most talked about challenges. The crew members were uneasy, but Mr. Beast remained resolute. "We'll film the aftermath," he said, trying to brush off the unease that had been creeping up on them. But deep down, even he couldn't deny the tension in the air. This time, they were not going for a challenge. They were going to investigate. Armed with cameras, paranormal experts, and a team of skilled investigators, they entered the mansion once again. But this was not the same mansion they had visited months before. The air felt thicker, the walls colder, and even the sunlight seemed dimmer as it streamed through the mansion's dusty windows. As they explored, the once grand estate appeared even more deteriorated. Windows were boarded up, strange symbols were etched into the wood, and there was an unsettling smell that lingered in the air. The temperature dropped dramatically, and each step they took echoed through the empty halls, amplifying the feeling of isolation. The group split into teams, with one group setting up cameras in the rooms where the most terrifying incidents occurred during the first visit. Mr. Beast and his closest team members ventured to the attic, where they had last seen the shadowy figure. What they discovered in the attic left them frozen in terror. The floor was covered in old, rotting furniture, and as they panned their lights across the room, they found something far more disturbing. Piles of old, faded photographs scattered across the floor. In the corner, a tattered journal lay open, with pages covered in frantic, spidery handwriting. The entries spoke of strange happenings, voices in the night, figures that weren't there, and the growing sense that something was watching. The last entry sent chills down their spines. It is waiting. It never leaves. It wants us here. It needs us. Suddenly, the air in the attic grew suffocatingly cold. The team members' breath became visible, and a low hum echoed through the walls, as if the house itself was alive and aware of their presence. The hairs on the back of their necks stood on end, as they heard a faint whisper coming from the far end of the room. The cameras, which had been running non-stop, suddenly started malfunctioning, glitching and distorting the images. But through the static, the crew thought they saw something. Movement in the shadows, a figure standing just behind them, watching. A panicked shout came from the other team in the basement. "Get out! Now!" they screamed over the radio. The crew rushed to the basement, where they found their fellow team members pale, trembling, and pointing at the walls. In the dim light, the group saw it, scrawled in what looked like blood. "You should never have come back." With the cameras still rolling, they hurried out of the basement, but the moment they stepped outside the mansion's front doors, the temperature soared, and the sun seemed to pierce through the clouds, bathing the place in an almost unnatural light. But before they could leave, they realized something that sent their hearts racing. The team member who had gone missing during the first challenge, the one who vanished without a trace, was standing on the mansion's balcony. His expression was blank, lifeless, and his eyes, they were empty. As the crew looked up, he turned away slowly, as if beckoning them back inside. Panic set in. The group immediately ran to their vehicles, desperate to leave. But as they glanced back at the mansion, they saw something even more horrifying. All the windows, which had been dark, now glowed with a faint, eerie light. The mansion seemed to pulse, alive with some unseen force. The footage from the investigation was never fully released. Some of it was too disturbing, and some crew members couldn't bring themselves to watch what had happened. The edited parts, however, showed only the remnants of what the team had left behind: a haunted mansion, an empty balcony, and the disturbing feeling that the mansion was not just a building, but something far more sinister, something that had been waiting. Was the haunted mansion truly cursed, or had something far darker taken place? Something that the team and the world would never fully understand. As for Mr. Beast and his crew, they vowed never to return to that place again, but rumors still circulate online. Some say the mansion still stands, waiting for its next victims. Others claim that Mr. Beast's team only barely escaped the clutches of something far worse than they could ever imagine. The curse. Unleashed months passed, and Mr. Beast and his team tried to move on from the terrifying experience at the mansion. They resumed filming their usual challenges and grand acts of charity, but something was different. Every so often, one of them would catch a fleeting shadow at the edge of their vision, or hear an unfamiliar sound in the distance. The unease lingered, and no one could shake the feeling that the mansion had left its mark on them. But it wasn't until one of the crew members, Jake, discovered something chilling that the team began to realize the full extent of the horror they had unknowingly unleashed. Jake had been going through old footage, compiling highlights for an upcoming video. As he reviewed the hours of footage taken at the mansion, he noticed something strange. At first, it was subtle. On one camera, the reflection in a window looked off, almost distorted. On another, the background noise shifted unnaturally, like a low hum. But then, in one of the final shots, Jake froze. It was a moment when the crew had fled the mansion, and the camera had captured the empty mansion from afar. Just as the camera panned across the front of the building, there was a figure standing in the doorway, a man dressed in an old-fashioned suit, his face obscured by shadows. But the most unsettling part wasn't the figure itself. It was the fact that the man's face was still there, frozen, lingering in the video. Jake couldn't explain it. The team had never seen anyone at the mansion's entrance when they left. He called Mr. Beast, and together they decided to go through the footage frame by frame. In one frame, the man's face seemed to blink, and in another he grinned, a slow, sinister grin that made Jake's skin crawl. The team decided to confront the footage head-on. They arranged a final meeting with the paranormal experts who had been involved in the investigation. After reviewing the evidence, the experts delivered a grave warning. The mansion wasn't just haunted, it was cursed, and they had awakened something far worse than they had realized. The man in the doorway, they explained, was known as the Collector, a spirit bound to the mansion for centuries. He had been an infamous figure in the area, a collector of souls, and the mansion had served as his dark sanctuary. Over time, he had trapped the souls of the living within its walls, feeding on their fear and energy. But with the filming of the first challenge and the team's return to the mansion, they had broken the seal that kept him bound. Now the Collector was free to roam, and his curse was spreading. To make matters worse, Jake had experienced strange dreams after reviewing the footage. In each dream, he was trapped inside the mansion, unable to escape. The man in the suit would stand in the shadows, watching, waiting. Each time Jake tried to run, he would find himself back in the same room, the door always locked. The last time he dreamt of the mansion, he awoke in a cold sweat. But something was different. The figure in his dream had followed him. The team decided to return to the mansion one final time. They had to try to destroy whatever curse had been unleashed, and they hoped to put an end to it before anyone else was harmed. Armed with everything they could find, holy symbols, salt, and protection charms, they entered the mansion for what they feared could be their last time. Inside, the mansion was even darker than before. The shadows seemed to twist, and the air felt suffocating. The team followed the cold draft that led them to the cellar, where they found an old, decaying book resting on a stone pedestal. The book was covered in strange symbols, and as they opened it, they realized it was a ritual book, one that could either bind the Collector back into the mansion or unleash him completely. The ritual had a terrifying stipulation. They had to offer something of themselves to close the gateway forever. One member of the team would have to make the ultimate sacrifice to bind the spirit again. The crew stood in silence, realizing the gravity of the situation. The door behind them slammed shut, and suddenly they could hear the Collector's voice echoing through the halls, an eerie, distorted whisper, "I will take what is mine." A chilling wind swept through the room, and the mansion seemed to come alive. Doors slammed, and the shadows stretched toward them like reaching hands. They had no choice. One of them would have to stay behind. As they prepared for the ritual, they heard footsteps coming down the stairs. The figure in the suit was standing at the foot of the cellar, staring at them with that same haunting grin. The team scrambled to finish the ritual, desperate to seal the mansion's curse. In the final moments, they felt the weight of the curse pressing down on them, the air thick with malevolent energy. The book flared with a blinding light as the mansion itself seemed to scream. But just before the ritual completed, one of the team members, Kyle, stepped forward and placed his hand on the book. With a flash, the mansion fell silent. The air cleared, and the temperature returned to normal. The collector was gone. But when the team left the mansion, they knew it wasn't over. They had survived, but the curse was still lingering. Mr. Beast and his team vowed never to return to that mansion. But they all understood something chilling. They had left a piece of themselves behind. And in the distance, they could almost hear the collector's voice, waiting for the next challenge, the next soul to claim, the aftermath, a shadow that lingers. After the ritual, everything seemed to return to normal. The team had survived their harrowing encounter, and for a brief moment, it felt as though the curse of the mansion had finally been lifted. Mr. Beast and his crew moved on, continuing with their challenges and charitable deeds. But beneath the surface, something was not quite right. It started small, an unexplainable feeling of being watched. At first, it was dismissed as the result of their traumatic experiences, but soon, it became harder to ignore. Crew members began hearing faint whispers during their shoots, seeing shadows darting out of the corner of their eyes, or experiencing an oppressive chill that followed them, even in broad daylight. Then things took a darker turn one night, while filming a new challenge at a completely different location. Jake, the same crew member who had discovered the footage of the collector, was sitting alone in his hotel room, going over the day's shoot. As he scrolled through his phone, something caught his eye, a notification for a new video upload. The title read, "Unseen Footage, The Return." His heart skipped a beat. The video was from an unknown source, and the thumbnail was a familiar sight, a shot of the mansion, the very one they'd left behind. Confused and terrified, Jake clicked on the video. The footage was grainy, but unmistakably real. It showed the team leaving the mansion after their final encounter, just as they had remembered it. But then, the video continued, much longer than they had been there. In the new footage, the mansion seemed to shift and warp. The rooms appeared darker, as though time itself was distorting. Shadows moved across the walls, not caused by any natural light. Then in a flash, Jake saw the figure once again, the collector. He was standing in the doorway, his expression frozen in that same haunting grin. But this time, his eyes were glowing, pale, soulless orbs. As the camera zoomed out, Jake saw something even more horrifying. The collector was not alone. Behind him, the faces of past victims appeared, pale, contorted faces with hollow eyes, their mouths open in silent screams. They were trapped, their souls bound to the mansion, and now, it seemed, they were reaching out to Jake. Panic surged through him as the video cut off abruptly. The screen went black, and Jake's phone froze, as if the device itself was trying to reject what it had witnessed. Desperate, Jake tried to reach Mr. Beast and the rest of the team, but the call wouldn't go through. Instead, he received a chilling message. "The curse isn't over. The collector has you all." It was signed only with the words, "You should never have returned." That night, Jake could barely sleep. Every sound, every creak in the walls, every distant whisper seemed to echo the same warning. Something was hunting them, and it wasn't just the mansion that was cursed. It was the curse itself that had attached itself to them. The next day, Jake discovered he wasn't the only one who had received a message. Other members of the crew had received similar cryptic warnings, and some had even begun experiencing strange phenomena, objects moving on their own, visions of shadowy figures in the corners of their eyes, and dreams that were more like memories of the mansion. Mr. Beast, always the optimist, tried to stay positive. He reassured the team that it was all in their heads, that the mansion was in the past. But deep down, they all knew the truth. The curse was following them. The more they tried to ignore it, the more it seemed to consume them. Then, one by one, the team began to experience inexplicable incidents, each more disturbing than the last. It started with small things: cameras malfunctioning during shoots, strange symbols appearing in the background of footage, and then escalated to more terrifying events. One evening, during a live-streamed event, a team member's microphone picked up something chilling, a voice, deep and gravelly, whispering, "They're mine now." The entire crew froze, and for a moment, no one moved. The voice wasn't from any of them. It came from somewhere in the room, but there was no one else there. But the worst was yet to come. During an intense challenge set in an old theater, a crew member disappeared, vanishing without a trace. At first, it was assumed to be a prank or a stunt gone wrong, but when the team searched the building, there were no signs of struggle. It was as though the person had simply vanished. In the footage, something was captured that sent a chill down everyone's spine. A figure, draped in shadows, lurking in the background. The same figure from the mansion, the Collector. But now, he was closer, his eyes glowing, watching them all. And behind him, the faint outlines of the trapped souls were visible again, reaching out. As the team rushed to investigate further, they realized something terrifying. They hadn't just broken a curse. They had become part of it. They were bound to the Collector now, forever part of his collection. Each challenge, each new video, was feeding his power. The curse wasn't something they could run from. It was following them, no matter where they went. Mr. Beast and his crew now face a terrifying reality. The Collector's grip is tightening, and they are running out of time. Their only hope lies in finding a way to break the curse, once and for all. But the more they search for answers, the more they realize that there may be no escape. The mansion was just the beginning. The true horror is only beginning to unfold, and somewhere, in the darkness, the Collector is waiting for the next soul to claim the dark web of the Collector. The team had hoped that returning to normal life, filming their usual content and interacting with fans, would help them forget the horrors they had encountered at the mansion. But the curse that had followed them was relentless. It wasn't just haunting their dreams anymore. It was now haunting their reality. Jake, who had been the most affected by the strange video he found, became increasingly withdrawn. He started obsessively researching everything related to the Collector. His laptop screen was filled with pages of occult texts, old paranormal investigations, and obscure references to a dark entity that could collect souls. The deeper he dug, the more unsettling it became. There was something about the way the curse worked. It didn't just target people who had been inside the mansion. It was something much older, much more insidious. Jake uncovered an obscure piece of information buried in the deepest corners of the internet. A secret forum where the most dedicated paranormal investigators and occult enthusiasts shared their experiences with a terrifying entity known as the Collector. It was said that this entity had been a part of folklore for centuries, though it was never spoken about openly. The collector was said to move from place to place, feeding on fear and sorrow, but it would always return to the place where its curse had begun, until it was appeased. And that's when Jake made a horrifying connection. The mansion wasn't just a building, it was a gateway. The collector used it to trap souls, but it needed something more, a way to expand its power, to feed, to grow, and now the team had unwittingly become its next victims. The forum spoke of one terrifying truth. The collector could control the very fabric of reality itself. If left unchecked, the curse would begin to warp the world around them, distorting time, space, and the very fabric of their lives. As Jake shared his findings with Mr. Beast and the rest of the crew, it became clear that they were no longer just in danger. They were at the center of a much larger, much darker force. Their popularity, their fame, and the massive online presence they had built up were the perfect fuel for the collector. The entity fed off the attention, the fear, the energy of the millions of viewers who watched their videos. They were caught in a twisted game where their content and challenges were feeding the curse more and more. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about stopping the collector from breaking through into the real world. Desperate for answers, the team called in experts, paranormal investigators, psychics, and even historians who specialized in ancient curses. Together they pooled their knowledge, trying to find a way to stop the collector for good. What they discovered was far more horrifying than they had imagined. There was a ritual, an ancient, forbidden ritual that could sever the connection between the curse and the team. But it came with a terrible price. To perform the ritual, one member of the team would have to sacrifice something of great personal value, something tied to their deepest fears or desires. It could be a life, a love, or something that defined them. The sacrifice was meant to sever the collector's hold over them, but it could not be done without irreversible consequences. With no other choice, the team decided to go back to the mansion one final time. This time, they weren't going for a challenge. They were going to face the collector head-on. Armed with the ritual's instructions, they entered the mansion one last time, prepared to fight for their lives. As they stepped through the front door, the air grew cold and heavy, just as it had before. The mansion was unchanged, though now it felt more alive. Its very walls seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. The shadows in the corners of the rooms were darker, more tangible, as if they could reach out and grab them at any moment. They gathered in the main hall, where the ritual was to take place. The ground beneath them felt unstable, as if the house itself was shifting, trying to throw them off course. The temperature dropped dramatically, and their breath became visible in the air. As they began chanting the incantation, the mansion seemed to respond. The walls groaned, and the floor trembled beneath them. Suddenly, the room went dark. The sound of footsteps echoed in the distance, growing louder and louder. The collector's voice rang out, distorted and hollow. "You cannot stop what has already begun. You belong to me now." The crew held their ground, but as the ritual reached its peak, something unexpected happened. The shadows began to twist and form into solid shapes, the faces of those who had disappeared, their expressions twisted in pain and agony. They were not just trapped in the mansion anymore. They were bound to the collector forever. Suddenly, the figure of the collector appeared in front of them. His tall, shadowy form loomed over the group, his glowing eyes fixed on them. He stepped closer, and the room grew darker still, the air thick with the weight of impending doom. The team's hearts raced. The ritual was not complete, and it was clear they were running out of time. The figure of the collector reached out his hand, and the walls began to close in. The mansion seemed to be alive with evil energy, and it was only a matter of moments before the curse consumed them entirely. In a final act of desperation, one of the team members, Kyle, stepped forward. He had always been the quiet one, the one who had never fully opened up. Now, as he stood before the collector, he realized the one thing he had to offer as a sacrifice: his own deepest regret. With a solemn look, Kyle spoke the words of the final part of the ritual. "I sacrifice myself for the team. I give everything I am to stop this." The moment he spoke the words, a blinding light engulfed the room, and the collector let out a horrifying, otherworldly scream. The mansion shook violently as the curse was pulled back into itself, trapped once more. But in the chaos, Kyle vanished. His sacrifice had severed the connection, but in doing so, he had become a part of the mansion's curse, just as the collector had always intended. The mansion was silent. The walls stopped groaning, the shadows receded, and the air grew still. It was over. The curse had been broken, but at a cost. The final toll, a new beginning. It had been days since Kyle's sacrifice, but the team still couldn't fully process the events that had transpired. The mansion was silent, but the impact of what had happened lingered in the air. The curse had been broken. The collector was sealed away once more, but the price had been steep. Kyle was gone, his soul bound to the mansion, a permanent part of the curse that he had fought so hard to destroy. The crew returned to their lives, trying to continue with their work, but it wasn't the same. The shadow of the mansion and the ghost of what had happened there haunted them at every turn. They found themselves growing increasingly paranoid. The smallest things would set them off. An unexpected noise, a flash of shadow, a sudden cold breeze. They couldn't shake the feeling that the collector was still watching, that the mansion's curse had not truly ended. Jake especially couldn't let go of the pain of Kyle's sacrifice. He had been one of the closest to Kyle, and the loss felt unbearable. Every night, Jake had vivid dreams of Kyle standing in the doorway of the mansion, calling for help, trapped in a world between the living and the dead. It was a cruel reminder that even though the curse was broken, the souls of those lost in the mansion would never be free. Then one evening, something happened that shattered their fragile sense of normalcy. Jake received an anonymous package at the team's office. The box was unmarked, sealed tight with black tape. Inside, there was nothing but an old faded photograph. It was a picture of Kyle, the same picture from the day of the ritual. But this time, there was something different about it. The photo was warped, the edges curling as if it had been aged by years of decay. Kyle's eyes were missing, replaced with dark, hollow voids, and behind him, standing just out of focus, was a figure, the same shadowy figure they had seen at the mansion. The photo was accompanied by a single note, written in a familiar, chilling handwriting. "He's not gone. Not yet. The collector never lets go." The team was paralyzed with fear. Had the collector truly been defeated? Or had they simply sealed it away, leaving a lingering thread that had now resurfaced? The realization hit them hard. Kyle's sacrifice had not been enough. The curse had found a new way to reach them. Determined to end it once and for all, Mr. Beast called a meeting with the rest of the crew. He could see the fear in their eyes, but there was also a shared resolve. They would not let this horror define them. They would confront the collector once again, and this time they would do whatever it took to destroy the curse forever. They began researching, diving deep into the occult, looking for any way to put an end to the collector's power. But the more they searched, the more they realized the truth. The curse could not be defeated by force or by rituals alone. The only way to truly end it was to uncover the dark secret that tied the collector to the mansion, to destroy the source of its power once and for all. And so, the team made the difficult decision to return to the mansion. But this time, they would not be alone. They sought out a group of experienced occultists, people who had dealt with entities like the collector before, and together they planned a final ritual, one that could sever the mansion's link to the spirit world entirely. When they arrived, the mansion was even more oppressive than before. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if the very walls were closing in on them. But they pressed on, determined to end the nightmare once and for all. As they entered the mansion's darkened halls, they could feel the weight of the past pressing on them. The spirits of the trapped souls seemed to whisper in the darkness, their cries muffled by the walls, but still they could hear them, their warnings, their sorrow. They made their way to the cellar, the heart of the mansion's dark power. The air was colder here, the shadows darker. The team gathered in a circle, with the occultists chanting in an ancient language, invoking the power that would hopefully sever the collector's link to the living world. But as they began the ritual, the mansion seemed to fight back. The temperature dropped, their breath turning to mist. A loud, ear-splitting shriek echoed through the halls, and the very walls of the mansion seemed to shake. The collector's voice roared, a cacophony of distortion and malice. "You cannot escape. You are mine." Suddenly the room was filled with a blinding light. The shadows around them twisted, forming into the figures of the souls trapped by the collector. They reached out, their faces twisted in agony, their voices begging for release. The team fought to hold their ground as the occultists continued their chant, their words growing louder, more urgent. Then, just as it seemed like the mansion itself would consume them, the ritual reached its peak. With a final deafening roar, the collector's presence began to fade. The walls trembled, and the floor cracked, as if the mansion itself was being torn apart. The cursed energy that had permeated the air for so long began to dissipate, and for the first time, the team felt a shift. The weight that had pressed down on them for so long was lifted. The mansion went silent, and then it was gone. The air cleared, the darkness lifted, and the oppressive energy that had suffocated them vanished. The collector was no longer there. The mansion, once a place of death and despair, was now nothing more than an abandoned ruin. The curse had been severed, its link to the living world destroyed, but the cost had been great. Kyle's soul had been freed, but at the expense of the mansion itself. It had taken everything, its foundation, its power, and the last remnants of the spirits trapped within. As the team stood in the ruins of the mansion, exhausted and shaken, they knew the battle was over. But the scars left by the collector, the trauma, the memories, would never fade. They had faced the darkest forces of the supernatural and survived. But they had lost part of themselves in the process. And though the collector was gone, the memory of its terror would forever haunt their minds. Shadows that remain. Months passed since that fateful night, yet the memory of the mansion lingered with each member of the team. Life moved forward, new videos, new challenges, new fans, but something had permanently changed. They carried the weight of what they had endured, and each team member dealt with it in their own way. Jake, once the skeptic and researcher, became more reclusive, his interest in the paranormal now tainted by the terror they had survived. He could no longer see the supernatural as just stories. It was real, and he had seen its power firsthand. The shadows still haunted his dreams, flashes of Kyle's hollow eyes, and the horrific image of the collector burned into his mind. For Mr. Beast, the experience left him questioning more than just the supernatural. He had always been the fearless leader, pushing boundaries and diving headfirst into every challenge. But now he realized how fragile the line was between entertainment and danger, between what they could control and what they could not. He made a silent promise to be more cautious, to never again tread carelessly into unknown darkness. The team tried to talk about what had happened, but the words felt hollow. How could they convey the horror, the helplessness, and the crushing loss of Kyle to anyone who hadn't lived it? They each felt a mixture of relief and grief. The mansion was gone, its curse destroyed, yet Kyle's absence was a permanent reminder of the price they had paid. Then one night, a strange occurrence shattered the uneasy peace that had settled around them. A message appeared on Jake's laptop while he was editing a new video. It was a brief, corrupted text file titled, "He is with me." Jake's heart raced as he opened it, and he felt a chill run down his spine as he read the message. "I am still here, and I will always be watching." The words were simple, but they carried the unmistakable darkness of the collector. Jake's hands shook as he read them over and over, his mind racing to understand. The mansion was destroyed, the curse broken, wasn't it? He called Mr. Beast immediately, but when he returned to his computer to show the message, the file was gone. Every trace of it had disappeared, as if it had never existed. Jake's heart sank, and a sickening realization settled over him. The entity may have been tied to the mansion, but its reach, its influence, was not bound to physical walls. They all began to experience small, unsettling signs, flickering lights, cold drafts, shadows that seemed to stretch and move when no one was looking. The reminders were subtle, but clear. The collector was not fully gone. Kyle's sacrifice had weakened its hold, but some dark fragment had lingered, attached to them like a parasite, feeding on their fear. Each time they released a new video, strange comments would appear, viewers mentioning odd glitches and shadows in the background. Some fans even claimed to see a shadowy figure lurking behind them, flickering briefly on screen before disappearing. The fear began to spread, their viewers sensing the same darkness that haunted them. Determined to take control, the team made one final, unanimous decision: to reveal the full story to their audience. They released a video detailing everything, every frightening encounter, every twisted piece of the curse, and the unbearable loss of Kyle. They shared the raw footage, the horrifying shadows, and even the photos of the mansion's decaying halls. The video was unlike anything they had ever posted before. It was real, terrifying, and brutally honest. Fans responded with shock, fear, and sympathy, expressing their support and sorrow for the team's experiences. The video quickly went viral, drawing in millions of views, and something unexpected happened. The fear that had once bound them to the curse began to dissolve, replaced by an overwhelming surge of support and understanding. The power the collector had fed upon, the secrecy, the fear, the isolation, was finally broken. By sharing their story, they had robbed the curse of its hold. And though they would always carry the memories, they felt the lingering weight start to lift. Days after posting the video, Jake received one final sign. In the quiet hours of the night, he felt a cold breeze pass through his room, and for a fleeting moment, he saw Kyle's face, serene and free. Jake whispered a silent thank you, feeling the presence fade, leaving behind a calm that he hadn't felt in months. The team knew they would never truly be the same. They had faced darkness, lost friends, and nearly lost themselves. But through the ordeal, they had emerged stronger, bound by something deeper than fear or fame. They knew now that they had been given a second chance, and they wouldn't waste it. The haunted mansion was gone, its curse broken, but its story would live on, not as a horror tale, but as a testament to the courage, sacrifice, and resilience they had found in themselves. And as for the collector, it was gone, locked away in the ruins of the past, or at least they hoped so.